Hi, I'm briefly going to talk about the First Amendment, what it is and what it's not. I think people have quite the wrong idea about it. Maybe it's well-meaning, but there are many fringe groups on the opposite poles of the political spectrum who find themselves banned or restricted or circumscribed or punished for their supposed free speech activity, and most of it is, but you have to take context into equation. The First Amendment is not an absolute guarantee that you can speak in public, whether it's at a college campus or other public venues. So let's go over some 4 points regarding the First Amendment. First, the government can actually regulate time, place, and manner of speech. For example, a protester, again, doesn't matter, far right, far left, middle, takes a bullhorn at 2 in the morning in a otherwise quiet residential neighborhood and starts giving a speech, some sort of dissertation, what have you. Now, the government cannot restrict the content, although there are exceptions to that also, but they're very narrow. But the actual event or the act of speaking in that method, in that time, place, and manner, a time where people are asleep, in the manner that he does, on a bullhorn, which is incredibly disruptive, that can be regulated, and there's nothing that you can do about it if you're the person conducting that manner of speech. There's no cause of action if you want to sue the government for something like that. Now, if it's during the daytime, and perhaps it's a different location, another type of public thoroughfare, like a non-residential area. Now, the argument tilts more towards the ability of that person to speak for example, at a public protest where there are, several hundred or thousands of people. Now it's different. There's daylight. You have to take context into account. The First Amendment is not black or white. There's a ton of nuance. And to summarize that first point, the government can enforce restrictions on time, place, and manner, just not content. Although, as I mentioned earlier, there can be limitations to that as well. The second thing you need to know, and I hear a lot, I hear people, again, at the extreme, usually it's the extremes of the political spectrum, the far right or the far left, people who are really seem to be like hounding for attention, public attention. This is not a political video, by the way, but this generally, the complaints that I see come from either of those two camps. When a private actor, let's say a private corporation or Twitter, social media organization, I saw this one fella who subscribes to a far-right ideology. I don't want to mention who he is. And he was complaining that Twitter was violating his First Amendment right. That's incorrect. Twitter is not a government entity, okay, per se. They can do that. They can take off his account. There's nothing he can do about it. Now, is that immoral, or is that does that conceptually or philosophically violate the concept of free speech? I don't know. That's not really my concern with this video. It's regarding the legality of it. The legality of it is absolutely Twitter or other social media venue, generally speaking, and I mean in the super majority of cases, they can legally do that. The third thing you want to look for, if in fact there is what's called a symbiotic relationship, meaning a university, a college campus, some place of higher learning, and it's a private institution. Let's say it's not, like in California, we have the we have the California University system. We have University of California, Los Angeles, SC, all these other campuses. Now, these are, generally speaking, these are government funded. They do receive private contributions as well, but those are considered to be more public colleges, universities. So in that context, if those institutions try to limit your speech, if you're a far left or far right activist and you want to give a very controversial speech and there are going to be security issues and that sort of thing, you're going to have a sympathetic ear in court. Obviously, it's going to depend on the venue and all that. There are some courts and appellate districts. There are judges that are more friendly or less friendly to that sort of audience, and then you can take it up on appeal. I'm not going to get in too much into that, but just to come back to that, if you're talking about a public university, in other words, it mostly or greatly receives government funds, even if it also receives private donations, you could make, and very likely successfully, the argument that they cannot restrict your ability to speak. If it's a completely private university or school or venue, you're going to have a very tough time making that argument. You're probably going to lose. Now, one thing that is very important to understand, because I see a lot of people getting this wrong, some folks think that the First Amendment is only a federal protection, meaning if a local agency, a state agency, restricts your speech, that they're able to do that because the First Amendment doesn't apply, because it's the federal Constitution. That's nonsense. And the reason that doesn't make sense is because of something called the Incorporation Doctrine under the 14th Amendment. Historically, the courts have applied the First Amendment from the U.S. Constitution to the states and to the down to at the local level. So yeah, a state or local agency can be held accountable for censoring you, or what's called a prior restraint. Those generally are not allowed, although there are. You need to understand that the law, in almost, particularly with the Constitution, these are general rules. There's always going to be, or in almost every situation, there's going to be an exception. You have to take context. It's not absolutely one way or another. These are broad principles. But in any event, local and state agencies, again, so long as they're state actors or they're symbiotic with a private agency, but the argument can be made that they're acting on behalf of a public or a government entity, yes, they can certainly be held accountable. And many times the way that happens is through something called injunctive relief. For example, if somebody wants to be able to give an extremely controversial and divisive speech at a public venue or university or what have you, and the First Amendment attaches by virtue of the fact that this is a public actor, not a private actor, then generally speaking, they can get something called injunctive relief. Generally, you're not suing for money damages, but rather to have the court enforce the speaker's ability to speak. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. Just to summarize, free speech is a magnificent idea. It's part of the Western tradition, but I'm talking about the First Amendment. I'm not talking about the philosophical aspect of it or the political aspect of it. I'm talking about the First Amendment, because a lot of people have a very wrong idea of what it stands for, and I hope this has been helpful to you. Thank you.